Hello everybody. Today a quick update on MicroStrategy, which is this is it. MicroStrategy should be included in the Nasdaq 100. Why? Because MicroStrategy needed to be below the top 75, and so when you look up the stocks listed on the Nasdaq and you look at the list and you sort that list by market cap, you see that MicroStrategy is number 54 at 83.79 billion of market cap, so well under the top 75, which means that the QQQ, in theory, unless anything shady happens in the indexation process, in theory should add MicroStrategy based on their rule. We were waiting for that last Friday of November for a few months. It's happening. Their number 54. Is the QQQ secured? Well, we'll know in early December. I think it's the 20th of December, something like that. If it's the 13th or 20th, but we'll know in early to mid-December is when we'll know officially. We won't know officially today, but based on the rule, it should be good to go. And so why do we care about this? Why do we care a lot about this? So instead of calculating it myself, as you know, if you follow the channel, I'm trying to incorporate AI as much as possible in my workflow, and being from the Google era, it's a learning curve, but I'm putting AI in my workflow and I'm impressed by AI. ChatGPT is great here. It calculates for me that really we should expect from QQQ alone 1.08 billion of inflow into MicroStrategy from QQQ alone. So that's quite a bit, and they're gonna have MicroStrategy is gonna have a weight of 0.49% of the triple Q. So that's pretty good if you ask me. Now, when I asked it to add all of the funds, not just the QQQ, but there's like 10 competitors to the QQQ who also track the Nasdaq 100. So the total, taking all of the competitors of the QQQ plus the QQQ, the total is $273 billion roughly. And so I'm going to round it up to 280 billion, which is what I had in another search that I did on Google. So anyways, 280 billion times 0.0049, that's 1.37 billion, which should flow into the stock very soon, right? Perhaps in the next 2 weeks, that should flow into the stock. And maybe some of these funds have already bought MicroStrategy in anticipation of the index addition. And if you also take into account the monthly flows into these ETFs, because retirement accounts, individual investors, retail investors from around the world, well, there's this philosophy that says, oh, you should just buy the index. That's what bogleheads believe. And the wiser bogleheads have figured out that really the index to buy is the QQQ. No financial advice, but the QQQ has outperformed for now well over a decade the S&P 500, and a lot of people prefer the QQQ. I myself, if I have to buy an index, it's always going to be the triple Q, never the S&P. So looking at these new flows, based on these new flows, we should expect about $300 million a year of perpetual bid. So I'm going to be optimistic and tell you we should get about $1 million, roughly, right, a trading day, maybe a little more than $1 million a trading day of just buys, just plain buys. This is not even volume. This is not buy and sell. This is just plain buys. So we're getting a nice form of a perpetual bid. And don't forget, this index rebalances, right? And so whenever MicroStrategy goes up every quarter, the index is going to rebalance. And so it's entirely possible that if MicroStrategy, say, gets to, I don't know, 140, 160 billion, it's entirely possible when we get 1% of the index, right? And 1% of the index would be, double of that, right? So it would be another 1.3 billion is what it would be. So anyways, it's pretty fascinating, the flows that we're going to get from the QQQ. That's what we were waiting for. Briefly answering the question that some people say, oh, it's a financial company, it will not be included. Well, the big advantage of using a QQQ, which is purely market weight based, it's purely formula based. The big advantage is that you don't have any problems such as committee biases like the S&P 500, for example. You know that Tesla was added very late to the S&P 500 because the committee thought that it was not a real car company because they only had 4 models of cars, while all the other ones had 15 models of cars. And so they kept Tesla out of S&P for the longest time. I expect the committee of the S&P 500 to do the same thing for MicroStrategy for quite a while, because insert X, Y, Z analog 20th century reason as to why they wouldn't want it. S&P is committee-based. It's tougher to get an index that is committee-based. The Nasdaq is not. The Nasdaq is a simple calculation, and what they've historically taken is what the stock is listed at. And MicroStrategy is listed on the Nasdaq as a software company. And of course, it is a software company. Yeah, who just happens to have a Bitcoin treasury strategy, but it is a software company. By the way, PayPal is in the Nasdaq, and PayPal, I would argue, is much more financial oriented than, say, a MicroStrategy. And let me conclude with my usual black hole chart. I'm only focusing right now on the common, on the issuance of the common. We're forgetting about the bonds today in today's celebration, because today is a great day for MicroStrategy. What's happening? The money supply grows and grows and grows. I estimate the growth of the money supply both within the US financial system and within the financial system of dollars held abroad at foreign banks. I estimate that it grows by 15% each year. 15% new dollars get printed each year. Some of these new dollars, of course, go into inflation, and that increases the cost of food and the cost of housing, healthcare, education, whatever. Another big chunk of that capital flows into assets. The second or third, depending on how you look, the second or third biggest asset class, depending on how you look, is stocks. People buy stocks via ETFs in a very popular fashion. ETFs are an extremely popular way to gain exposure to stocks. So logically, the growth of money supply, a big chunk of that should flow into the ETFs. Perhaps the number 2 king out of all of the ETFs is the QQQ. It's one of the most popular ETFs, definitely a top 5. I would argue the number 2. And so when it's going to flow into the QQQ, about 0.5% of these flows are going to go into MicroStrategy. That's what we call the perpetual bid. And of course, MicroStrategy will take advantage of that perpetual bid, probably by issuing new shares whenever the price to NAV is a little high. Like if MicroStrategy's to Bitcoin price, the price to NAV is like a 6, it makes sense for MicroStrategy to tap the ATM to issue common shares, because there is a perpetual buyer in one of the world's largest index. And that perpetual buyer buys the shares, and then MicroStrategy takes that money and puts it straight into Bitcoin. Doesn't put it into SBC, doesn't put it into business endeavors, puts it trades straight into Bitcoin, or mostly, right? Like 98%, 99% of it goes into Bitcoin. No financial advice as always on this channel, as you know that. It's just entertainment. In my view, QQQ, that's the best ETF out there. I would never touch the S&P 500 because it's filled with bloated companies like General Motors, insurance companies, car companies, banks. Oof, I would never touch that stuff. But definitely when it comes to QQQ, I think it's the best index out there. Just my opinion. Many growth mutual funds also worth mentioning, especially those that are pseudo managed, like, oh, it's a growth fund, they have a pseudo manager, they're really a growth fund just because, you know, they want to earn higher fees and not say they're an index fund. But you can see that a lot of the growth mutual funds actually also copy the QQQ and the additions in the QQQ. Anyways, 280 billion of asset under management in total. And let's not forget that there's also going to be more money, more flow coming from the TQQQ. So the TQQQ is actually $25 billion of asset under management. Of course, it's a leveraged ETF that creates some volatility on top of the QQQ, which itself adds some bid and some volatility on top of MicroStrategy. So when you think about layers, we got a lot of layers out here to think about, from Bitcoin to MicroStrategy to QQQ to the TQQQ to the growth in the money supply. But at the end of the day, this continues this idea of a black hole. The indices grow, the indices become more and more popular, more and more investors believe in investing in the indices, And what that means is that they're not actively making a decision to exclude, say, a MicroStrategy. In fact, most people who buy those indices don't know. I mean, they know the top 10, right? They know Apple, Amazon, that they know, but they don't know the top 54. And MicroStrategy should be the top 54 stock in that index starting probably mid-December. So I really look forward to that. Anyways, this was not financial advice, not investment advice. This is just entertainment. I hope you were entertained. Please like, please subscribe. Follow me on Patreon, follow me on X. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.